Biodiversity or biological diversity is a term that refers to the number of genes, species, individual organisms within a given species and biological communities within a defined geographic area, ranging from the smallest ecosystem to the global biosphere. Likewise, biodiversity loss describes the decline in the number, genetic variability, and variety of species and the biological communities in a given area. This loss in the variety of life can lead to a breakdown in the functioning of the ecosystem where decline has happened. The idea of biodiversity is most often associated with species richness, the count of species in an area, and thus biodiversity loss is often viewed as species loss from an ecosystem or even the entire biosphere. However, associating biodiversity loss with species loss alone overlooks other subtle phenomena that threaten long-term ecosystem health. Even though a species is not eliminated from the ecosystem or from the biosphere, its niche diminishes as its numbers fall. If the niches filled by a single species or a group of species are critical to the proper functioning of the ecosystem, a sudden decline in numbers may produce significant changes in the ecosystem structure. For example, clearing trees from a forest eliminates the shading, temperature and moisture regulation, animal habitat, and nutrient transport services they provide to the ecosystem. Natural biodiversity loss. An area's biodiversity increases and decreases with natural cycles. Seasonal changes such as the onset of spring create opportunities for feeding and breeding, increasing biodiversity as the populations of many species rise. In contrast, the onset of winter temporarily decreases an area's biodiversity as warm-adapted insects die and migrating animals leave. In addition, the seasonal rise and fall of plant and invertebrate populations, which serve as food for other forms of life, also determine an area's biodiversity. Biodiversity loss is typically associated with more permanent ecological changes in ecosystems, landscapes, and the global biosphere. Natural ecological disturbances such as wildfire, floods, and volcanic eruptions change ecosystems drastically by eliminating local populations of the species and transforming whole biological communities. Such disturbances are temporary, however, because natural disturbances are common and ecosystems have adapted to their challenges. Human-driven biodiversity loss. In contrast, biodiversity losses from disturbances caused by humans tend to be more severe and longer lasting. Humans, their crops, and their food animals take up an increasing share of the Earth's land area. Forest clearing, wetlands filling, stream channeling and rerouting, and road and building construction are often part of a systematic effort that produces a substantial change in the ecological trajectory of a landscape or a region. As human populations grow, the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems they use may be transformed by the efforts of human beings to find and produce food, adapt the landscape to human settlement, and create opportunities for trading with other communities for the purposes of building wealth. Biodiversity losses typically accompany these processes. Researchers have identified 5 important drivers of biodiversity loss. First is the habitat loss, which is any thinning, fragmentation, or destruction of an existing natural habitat reduces or eliminates the food resources and living space for most species. Species that cannot migrate are often wiped out. The second one is invasive species, which are non-native species that significantly modify or disrupt the ecosystems they colonize, may outcompete native species for food and habitat, which triggers population declines in native species. Invasive species may arrive in new areas through natural migration or through human introduction. The third one is overexploitation, which is the harvesting of game animals, fish, or other organisms beyond the capacity for surviving populations to replace their losses, results in some species being depleted to very low numbers and others being driven to extinction. The fourth one is the pollution, which is the addition of any substance or any form of energy to the environment at a rate faster than it can be dispersed, diluted, decomposed, recycled, or stored in some harmless form, contributes to biodiversity loss by creating health problems in exposed organisms. In some cases, exposure may occur in doses high enough to kill outright or create reproductive problems that threaten the species' survival. And the last one is the climate change. Climate change associated with global warming, which is the modification of Earth's climate caused by the burning of fossil fuels, is caused by industry and other human activities. Fossil fuel combustion produces greenhouse gases that enhance the atmospheric absorption of infrared radiation and trap the heat, influencing temperature and precipitation patterns. Ecologists emphasize that habitat loss, typically from the conversion of forests, wetlands, grasslands, and other natural areas to urban and agricultural uses, and invasive species are the primary drivers of biodiversity loss, but they acknowledge that climate change could become a primary driver as the 21st century progresses. In an ecosystem, species tolerance limits and nutrient cycling processes are adapted to existing temperature and precipitation patterns. Some species may not be able to cope with environmental changes from global warming. These changes may also provide new opportunities for invasive species, which could further add to the stresses on species struggling to adapt to changing environmental conditions. All five drivers are strongly influenced by the continued growth of the human population and its consumption of natural resources. Interaction between two or more of these drivers increase the pace of biodiversity loss. Fragmented ecosystems are generally not as resilient or contiguous ones, and areas clear-cut for farms, roads, and residences provide avenues for invasions by non-native species, which contribute further declines in native species.